So HEITMAN is a real estate investment management firm based in Chicago. We have about 32 billion of assets under management, about 4 billion of that in Europe. Just under 40% of it is in Central and Eastern Europe, and of that, about 40% of it, just under 40% of that is in Poland. Unlike some of the other people who have been on the stage earlier, who are also kind of global US originating investment management firms, when we came to Europe a little over 20 years ago, we actually came to Central and Eastern Europe first. The Warsaw Financial Center investment, which was mentioned earlier, was actually our first investment in Europe. I'm the Director of Research and Strategy for HEITMAN in Europe.
Great, thank you. Xavier.
I'm with Catella. I'm the investment management arm of Catella. Catella has about 2.5 billion in investments in Europe, of which about, I would say, half is in residential, and our interest in the Polish market for the foreseeable short-term future is in residential.
Great. Robert.
Robert Dobrzycki. I'm running Panattoni in Europe. Panattoni Europe is a logistic industrial real estate development company. We are definitely the most active in Central Europe and probably, to be counted, probably the most active in Europe overall.
Hadley.
Good morning. Lovely to see you all looking so fresh after your coffee. I am this mysterious Hadley Dean, who is the new CEO of Echo Prime Properties. So not to be confused with Echo Investment, which Nicholas Lingberg is running. But Echo Prime Properties is 18 assets across Poland, primarily 70% retail. And as Prabik mentioned earlier on, we were looking to list in the near future in Europe and outside Europe.
Great. Brian.
We have to share microphones here. So I'm Brian Jenkins. I run multi here in Central and Eastern Europe. It's hard to say multi without mentioning Blackstone in the same voice. They purchased multi in 2013, but multi was formerly multi-development. Now it's multi-corporation. We manage 70 properties across Europe, most of which are either in Turkey or in Central and Eastern Europe. We have 19 properties here between Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, the Ukraine, believe it or not, and Latvia. So, you know, we're looking forward to a couple of new developments, one under construction right now in Gdansk, Forum Gdansk, and future looks bright.
Good. I mean, one thing I wanted to pick up straight away with you, Brian, was looking back over yesterday, there was some discussion about particularly planning, and if you're, you know, multi-operating across a lot of different regions, Turkey one of them, where planning is not necessarily the most straightforward part. How is that for this region, and is that kind of a key influencer on your business?
Well, I think planning varies quite a bit across Europe, but in Central and Eastern Europe, it's probably one of the most difficult and greatest impacts on the retail industry. The uncontrolled master planning, particularly here in Poland, has led to, you know, if the city can't control it and the banks and developers can't control themselves, there's only one party left, and guess who that is? That's the tenant. And right now, the tenant controls everything that goes on. They decide where they want to go, where they want to leave, and at what economics. And so that has really created an uncomfortable dynamic for all developers, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. I don't want to be Dr. Doom here, but you know, this is something that eventually has to get under control.
Okay. And in terms of just picking up on other trends, Hadley, in terms of the development side that you're looking at, rapidly changing world, lots of different consumer interests. You're obviously looking particularly on the retail side as well about the people who are coming into the shopping centres, the people who are, you know, so you've got consumer trends to look at, you've also got investment trends to look at, asset management trends to look at. What are the kind of key things that you're looking at, really?
Okay, well, so Echo Prime Properties is going to obviously be a REIT, so we have to look at everything. And the idea of Echo Prime Properties is to build up really, let's say, the first national champion to go out and look at all sectors, not just retail or offices. And I think one of the mega trends, because this is the title of this section, is what are the mega trends? And I think when we look at retail and we look at logistics, you have e-commerce is driving a huge amount both in retail and logistics. But let's say for two particular trends. On the logistics side, e-retailing warehousing needs 3 times more space than your traditional retail. So e-retailing, as it picks up, is very much driving. That's why he has a huge smile on his face every time he wakes up in the morning. and from a retail perspective, it comes down to core. It's no surprise why there are lots of retail assets on the market at the moment. The strong will survive, and what we're seeing in America is that the secondary retail markets are really dying. And e-retailing is not just killing the high streets, but it's killing the secondary first-generation shopping centers. Now, clearly there's some asset management plays, and that's not all doom and gloom, but e-retailing is having a big impact both on logistics and retail.
But, I mean, just briefly, Brian, for you, I mean, what about the argument then that you've now got e-retailers wanting to take physical space in stores, that retail is becoming much more about experience, about placemaking? How does that play into what Hadley's just said?
Well, I think e-commerce, internet shopping, shopping in your pajamas, whatever you want to call it, was a big hot button, and has been a big hot button for retailers and retail developers for the last 5 years. I think you're right in saying in the US and Western Europe it's had a much more profound effect. In Central and Eastern Europe it's just now gaining strength. And the reality is it's not going to kill the shopping center. I think everybody's past the scare of whether it's going to kill the shopping center. What it is going to do is redefine, in some cases, how we do business in terms of percentage rent or turnover rent. And it is going to determine our tenant mix. Changes will definitely occur in the anchor side. We're seeing in the US, recent news, department store market share is at an all-time low. Is that all because of e-commerce? No. Sears and JCPenney and Macy's have been dying a bad death for a long time. But Amazon is sealing the fate, and Amazon has just taken a major market share flow out of these tenants. And that's coming this way. We know that all of our fashion retailers, from Inditex down, are really building this internet shopping platform. And so what does that do for us? Long term, if you can't determine where the source of the sales are, you therefore can't really identify turnover rent. So therefore, we're going to a base rent strategy with all of these tenants. Long term, I'm not saying tomorrow, but long term, looks like that's where it's headed. So things will change. There'll be downsizing of anchors. Electronic stores have downsized by 2/3 in the last 2 to 3 years. They now become showrooms for internet shopping. But on the good note, there are upsizings that are happening. Food and beverage is doubling in size across most portfolios as developers want to create a better experience, which is absolutely necessary to compete with internet shopping. And these are all changes that are occurring, but the most important thing is the shopping center is not dying while this is going on.
Brian, you wanted to pick?
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything the other Brian has said. I think the opportunity for experience-based retail in Central and Eastern Europe is in a way almost stronger than it is in Western Europe, because one of the characteristics of this region is a lot of cities lack high streets, city center environments that are pleasant to hang out in. That's because there was destruction in the war, because of decades of communist architecture and the impact of that. So there are many places and many neighborhoods where the only sense of place where you'd really want to go and hang out with the family and have a meal or to really just enjoy being in a social environment with other people is a shopping center. And not all owners and developers have really taken advantage of that. The per capita amount of shopping center space in Central and Eastern Europe is higher than in Western Europe because it lacks in many cities those other types of environments. So shopping center owners that can think of the shopping center in a different way as an anchor for those types of activities, and even to densify them and to think about if other uses, including residential or office space, to think of them becoming sort of nodes for the community in a kind of an urban village type of format. You see that a little bit with what's evolved around Galeria Mokotów in Warsaw, but it's a big opportunity that really hasn't been really pursued in CEE enough.
And that's interesting. I mean, I'll come to the logistics side and see whether you do have a very wide smile on your face every morning, Robert, in a second.
Yeah, we need to be equitable here.
Xavier, for you, in terms of the residential side, do you agree with Brian in that sense? And also, I wanted you to pick up the point of that came through strongly yesterday, which was that you've now got seniors wanting to be in the same place as millennials, so gradually everybody's wanting to live together, almost the same kind of lifestyle, irrespective of age.
Yeah. Well, on the first point, I would say to the squared Brians, because I've got two here, you can also stay at home instead of going to the mall and shop from your bed, in your residential dwelling. So there is, from a residential perspective, I think new technologies are kind of a peaceful coexistence. We had yesterday this interesting speech about kind of a new Cold War with the Russians, and so I used the word of peaceful coexistence from Nikita Khrushchev. New technology in that sense is not a threat to residential, because home offices, you work from your home. You do home retail, which is basically you shop from your home. So you don't really have this threat of substitution, which I think makes residential from that angle quite a good and safe sector. And if you would take the other side of this spectrum, which would not be to think about how new technology could be a threat to your asset class, but perhaps the other opposite viewpoint would be how a lack of new technology could impact your investments. And there I notably think about what all the biophysicists are telling us. In the sense that if you want to transform anything which is an oil-based economy into an economy that drives on new energies, we all think that at some point technology will save us, because the challenge there is huge. And in case we would be in an environment where the technology would not be there on time to accommodate this massive shift, and this shift of course is massive, because for a glass of clean water you almost need half a glass of petroleum to make your clean water. I mean, the linkages are that clear. In case there would not be technology, that would be disruptive. So there's kind of a disruption of non-technology. And also in this axiom, on the other side, I think residential would sit relatively safe, because it's such a fundamental thing in the Maslow pyramid. That's something that you really need. If you would be investing in kind of a new app for tennis players, if the world becomes very unstable, new apps for tennis players is not something that is a profitable business. But perhaps renting out or owning or building construction homes still is. So I think technology in that wider spectrum is not really that much of a threat. It will embourgeois a bit some of the assets in the highest segments. It will give some safety. It will give some new features in terms of health. It gives some new features in terms of convenience. Perhaps the most important thing from my perspective is Google cars. Perhaps that will lead people to move outside of bigger metropoles. But I mean, we're still in kind of a medium threat environment, I would think. So, which makes the sector perhaps lazy. And on your second question,
well, I'm actually gonna pick up on one of the points you said there, which is about Google cars, because Robert, one of the things that is interesting, I think, at the moment, and we'll see if you think it is as well, but which is that if, for example, we then have driverless cars. Fine. That all works. It's been happening with planes for a long time. Everybody's comfortable with that. So we have that with driverless cars. We then have driverless lorries. As Damien says, they've then all got to be driven by electricity. Does that mean that where logistics hubs may be are not going to be driven any longer by the European Union's rules on how long a driver can drive, but it's actually going to be the battery life of the van?
Yes, absolutely. It's going to happen sooner or later, and I think, well, obviously that's going to improve the efficiency of the transportation, so the distances wouldn't be so scary as they are right now. It would mean also that the facilities would be larger and could serve larger areas with improvement of infrastructure, especially in Central Europe, and also improvement of technology. I mean, the cars could be driving the whole week, obviously. So there will be a much less kind of efficiency stress connected with transportation. Also, what will happen, and it's happening right now, currently there is a huge shift of logistic business from Western Europe to Central Europe because of the labor cost efficiencies. And obviously e-commerce is a big part of it because it's kind of a labor-intensive business. But e-commerce companies like Amazon are already thinking how to minimize the effect of labor on their businesses. What they do, they obviously work on the automation. They kind of, instead of people, they hire robots. They have a Kiva system, which is making them much less dependent on labor. Which is kind of, and on the other hand, driverless cars are making the distances shorter. So what you can do is to kind of serve really out of the really cheap location, kind of in the middle of nowhere location, large population of people, e-commerce wise. So, I mean, the market currently is going through really kind of a revolution. And e-commerce, I mean, however we defend retail, I mean, the retail is under pressure and it will continue to be under pressure. That's obvious. E-commerce will put constant pressure on retail. So obviously it's not going to disappear, but it's going to grow at much slower pace than obviously e-commerce and logistics. So that's happening. On the other hand, what also is happening is that cities are growing, but the need of customers to get the product the same day is pushing the last mile delivery centers closer to the city. And the cities are growing in the other direction. So the cost of real estate is going up. So there is no other way but to build multi-story warehouses at some point of time, which is kind of have the influence of urbanization and kind of e-commerce and the customer experience right now.
And if you're going to have e-commerce much more in terms of those urban environments, like you have mixed use retail and residential, will you get the same? Will we have sheds and beds?
I think it's going to happen because obviously you need to have the delivery points in the city to deliver almost the same day, the same half of the day. So I mean, warehouse space won't be only in a shed. It might be in some kind of a storage space in the sub-base, in the basement, right? So it's kind of going through revolution right now, and the storage space would be going closer to the city center over time.
Yeah, and there already is the emergence of pickup centers at shopping centers. We're seeing it now in Western Europe. It'll be here at some point when the internet, sales level gets to a certain peak, and they already exist in the U.S. So this becomes a new use. Right. Maybe not a great use, but it's a use for a shopping center.
Which, a retail center becomes a warehouse. Yeah.
And that picks up another point, Brian, actually, in terms of convenience, how important is that, do you think, going forward, that, essentially you've got to be local, convenient, and there's got to be a decent experience to take people into retail spaces to create something that is more interesting than sitting in their bedroom shopping at home?
Yeah, I think the single most significant dynamic that's occurred in Central and Eastern Europe is the emergence of the discount convenience store. Here in Poland, it's Biedronka. Biedronka now has a 30% market share of the grocery market. It is the largest employer of a workforce in Poland, and it has completely obliterated the hypermarket off the map. And so now we're finding in all of our centers, hypermarkets are either downsizing to become supermarkets or they're just leaving altogether because they can't compete. And so convenience has created that. Everything is actually almost too convenient. You can walk down the street outside and get by 4 Biedronkas before you get past 6 blocks. And that's just kind of the way it's evolved. But convenience is not just about proximity. Convenience is about ease of access, comfort, and convenience of being able to go through a shopping experience. So logically, 10 years ago, if someone wanted to go on a grocery trip, they had to get in their car, go park in a parking lot, go in and brave the crowds and the cash lines. Nothing really sexy about the grocery shopping experience. Now they walk down the street, they go right in the Biedronka, and they walk home. And that's what's evolved. And so they've made it not only easy because of proximity, but ease because of access. So how do we combat that as a shopping center? You've got to simply up the game in the experience level. You've got to be, and that's where the focus on the customer now by most developers has really picked up. You know, it's creating a much better experience both from the entrance all the way through the restrooms, all the amenities, soft seating, Wi-Fi, anything you can do to make the experience better. And food and beverage is a big, big part of that.
And technology, from what I can see, is also playing a much bigger part. There was something from one of the publications which you do, which is Retail Watch, is going to do it in November, something which is on how cameras can recognize when you come into a shopping center how you feel, and therefore try and enhance that. So it's probably will find me appearing, storming around, looking very cross, and won't quite know what to do, but maybe give me a donut.
Well, I mean, everybody has to be on, from the security officer all the way to the, the information clerk, because you're kind of one post away on Facebook of having a really bad day in our business now. You know, one bad post and everybody knows about it across Poland. So it's a little discomforting to know that, you're on the air all the time.
And Hadley, when you're looking at the market and you're choosing where you're going to make investments, where you're going to operate, how many of these trends are you looking at specifically for retail? What are the things that I guess you're worrying about, and what ones do you think are an opportunity?
Well, I think the primary focus for us is, I think the retail industry, doesn't matter whether it's ECE or multi or all of the major players, are doing a pretty good job in adapting to this, because change presents lots of opportunities, and the big players will do very well. So for us, when we're looking at, let's say, the next 5 years, we need to offer, a national experience. We want to be in all of the major cities in Poland. So that's really how we're looking at and focusing our energies. Which cities are we not in? How can we build up? And we have to sort of rebalance the relationship with the tenants a little bit.
Okay, good. And Brian, I wanted just to pick up with you. You're obviously looking at strategy. When you're looking at these kind of bigger trends and thinking specifically about the CEE region, what does that tell you about the sectors that you think will outperform, maybe the cities that will outperform, the environments, whether that's an urban environment, secondary cities? What does that make you see in terms of the investment strategy?
Well, I'll start with the big trends and then kind of comment on the strategic part. Taking a cue from the kind of title of the panel, which says urbanization, innovation, and demographics. I'll take each of those really quickly in turn. Urbanization is a word that I think has been kind of adopted by our industry and maybe misused a bit. I think traditionally the term urbanization is about economic development and the movement of people from rural areas into urban areas and towns and villages of all types as a country industrializes. I think we mean in real estate actually something slightly different than that. I think there's really two things we mean by that. One is kind of a lifestyle preference toward 24-hour amenities, sense of place, a kind of urban environment that people want to be in, and that you see that with the return to the inner cities in a lot of places, and the kind of things that are driving what are more successful urban environments. So that I don't know if I would call that urbanization, but it's a kind of a lifestyle trend. The other is sort of changes in the hierarchy of city and the kind of concentration of activity in global cities and the next tier down from global cities, and the success of the most interconnected places to the detriment of places that are less globally linked in. Now, Central and Eastern Europe really doesn't have any cities that would be called global cities on any kind of reasonable definition of what that means, but there are cities that are successful places where young people want to be, nice environments to live in that are doing very well in spite of demographics across the region that, as we've already established this morning, aren't good. So, London and Paris are the obvious global cities of Europe. The Warsaw metropolitan area population is growing faster than the Paris metropolitan area population. And so, I think that I think it was great that we heard a lot about Pittsburgh yesterday, because in the kind of scheme of American cities, Pittsburgh is a kind of a mid-sized city. And I think that, you know, successful cities across the world that have done well in spite of, you know, not aspiring to be a global city or to be New York, is a good model for what, you know, Central and Eastern Europe, the successful places, are going to look like. On the point of innovation in Central and Eastern Europe, it's all about moving up the value chain. So any economic model that's based upon a pure cost advantage will eventually go away. It's economic theory that it will converge and the prices will rise, and you've seen what's happened with coastal China, and it's no longer, you know, economic to produce in coastal China. 15 years ago, that was the huge growth story in the world, and it was so cheap. Central and Eastern Europe has the advantage of location because it's right on the doorstep of Western Europe, and it will always have an element of logistics and manufacturing and outsourcing because of that physical proximity. But I think you have to think about, you know, what are the next drivers, and it's really about moving into more creative sectors, design, R&D. And from an investor's perspective, which strategies, you have to think about which strategies are really keyed into that, as opposed to just this kind of proximity / cost arbitrage story, which is going to remain a part of what this region is, but it is not going to be the source of sort of new growth. And then finally, the other big theme that's in the title of this panel is demographics. And there's a big mismatch between the type of real estate that we have and the type of real estate that we need, as determined by demographic trends. And the two big ones that I would point at would be youth mobility and aging. So youth mobility is people go to university, then they go where the jobs are. And so that points to opportunities in student housing. It points to opportunities in the type of housing that young people need when they're in their 20s. So a kind of a small, a compact living kind of format, micro apartments, things like that. It points to the type of housing that's professionally managed for young people who are not ready to buy. So in other words, a PRS sector, to use the UK term. And so those are, I think, big opportunities in this region. The aging trend, obviously highly relevant to the emergence of senior housing. It was mentioned earlier today, and will be a big, there will be a senior housing product in this market eventually. It really doesn't exist in an investable way. But from a kind of an investment strategy perspective, all of those big themes are good and they're important, but what we've actually seen in our experience in this region is that the sectors that have outperformed have been the ones that have been less affected by highly elastic supply and overbuilding. And it's something that's been mentioned throughout the last 2 days, but there's a lot of sectors are heavily commodity oriented. There's not a lot of differentiation between this location or a block away because the master plans aren't strong. I mean, we went up last night in the Warsaw Spire and we looked down. It's a very impressive project, and the square that's been created at its base has a sense of place, and it'll be even better when that steakhouse is there. But you look down the other side of the building and there is an enormous roundabout, a hideous roundabout, which is, by the way, brand new because they tore it up to build a subway line through it, and they put it back. And you said last night that you're from High Wycombe, which is famous for having the world's most hideous, complicated roundabout. And it's astonishing to me to not think about walkability and placemaking, because it was a I don't remember who said it yesterday, but there was a statement that density creates value, and density creates scarcity. And a part of what's going to attract real estate capital to this region is if we can get past the extreme elasticity and irrationality of the supply that's come to the market, and part of that is making the product less commodity. Having being on this block is where you want to be, as opposed to 5 blocks away, because right now it is a developer's market. It's a tenant's market. Developers are running all over the place and putting up new stock, and it really makes it hard for the perspective of permanent capital for this region.
Good. I forgot to mention that this session is sponsored by the High Wycombe Tourist Authority, and I've got the mayor to speak to you now. Just in terms of the residential side, Xavier, one of the things that it's interesting to pick up on the points there, I think, from Brian. What is the demand, and particularly looking at this region, for seniors, for micro-living, for private rented sector, and what are the demands that you're getting from tenants? I mean, we did a session at Expo Real specifically on this sector, and including some guys from the US, and one of the things that they were being asked now for was to have pet centres as part of the residential build, because people needed somewhere to look after and care for their dog while they went to work. Now that may not be happening in the UK, it may not be happening here yet, but what are the things that are driving it from your point of view?
Well, I agree with a lot of the items that Brian mentioned. There is perhaps one thing to highlight a bit more, which is the problem of affordability. I sometimes feel that we're talking about, let's say, the first 10% or perhaps even the first 3% of the market, which are people that can afford those new concepts and really like to be first movers. But we're in a relatively low growth environment, and the affordability for a large part of the younger population is not that good. If you really look into also in our portfolios and the middle of the road kind of products, you see that people are, I think it's Stevie Wonder's song that says, living just enough for the city. There are quite a few people that are living just enough for the city. And at the end of the day, that is behind all the media hype, that it's interesting to be in London and it's interesting to be in Paris and we all want to be there and it's cool. And the influence and the power that comes from that, there's, I think, also a strong undercurrent of people that actually say, well, after 1 or 2 years, I'm not that happy there where I live, and the problem is one of affordability. So, which hooks into your question as to what kind of products are then needed. And then, of course, the market has not been providing new types of products that could meet somehow this demand, where people would trade off, for instance, space, so smaller space, for a kind of a better affordability. And I see some interesting things in shared living concepts that are starting to also take hold in Europe. And I think that in that sense, the mismatch between demand and supply is of course quite big. And the point that was raised on both the seniors and the millennials now seem to compete for inner city locations. No? I think that there's a point to make that the millennials, I think, will lose because of this affordability problem that we just addressed. The reason is quite simple. The seniors are becoming older and older and older, and how unfortunate it is to lose your parent. You normally get a heritage, so it's a transfer of capital from your old generation to your new generation. And that increases, of course, affordability for younger people. But the seniors are getting older and older and older, and perhaps in 10, 15 years, we will have average age of 95 and even 100. So the capital will be eaten up by the senior people to a large extent themselves, and the younger people will struggle with not having this transfer of capital as we were used to think about in the past. So affordability, I think, we cannot think about new concepts without taking very serious this problem of affordability.
Okay, good. I wanted to take questions from the floor if there's any questions. Yeah, go ahead. A microphone should reach you. And are there any others, just so that we can then, one here, great, so that we can have the microphones ready? Yes, go ahead.
You discussed a lot about the conventional retail shopping centers, full price. It seems that the country is well served in terms of GLA. What is happening with the outlet center? Do you see any future there? Do you see any growth potential? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think it is the one area. There are two relatively strong outlet portfolios here in Poland, but there's so much more potential. So while the shopping center is quickly, the enclosed shopping center is quickly coming to a saturation point, the opportunity for retail parks, for open air centers, for outlet centers, and for urban mixed-use development with retail is off the charts. There's a lot of blue sky for that.
Did you want to pick up on that, Hadley, or?
We're very interested in investing in that. So if you need forward funding, do come and have a chat.
Good. There was another question over here.
Yes, another retail-related question to the gentleman on my left. The one thing that e-commerce is offering to us in Poland is choice. Not so much the experience that retail is offering, but it offers choice, which you have in London, you have in Paris, you even have in Prague and Budapest. But in my personal opinion, there's not a lot of choice when it comes to brands and new offerings in Polish retail today, which is why e-commerce, it's one of many reasons why e-commerce is exploding in this country. And I enjoy the shopping experience. I also enjoy choice. What's your view on the next generation retail in Poland? Not so much in terms of the experience of getting easier access to the shopping center or parking your car closer to the entrance, but choice and taking it to the next level to provide an offer that you actually can have in Prague or Budapest.
Well, I think the choice will continue to improve in Central and Eastern Europe, regardless of whether it's offered on the internet or not, because bricks and mortar dovetails with the internet. It just does. I mean, if you pull one away, immediately the internet shopping for that particular source goes down. And that's been one thing that's been shown over a period of time. So, you know, I think they'll both survive, and I do think it's just the consumer gets the advantage because they get much more choice in both areas. They'll get an improvement of choice in the shopping center as tenants expand through internet and are able to open up stores where they probably wouldn't have if they didn't have internet before. And then internet retailing is going to continue to expand. So it's, you know, the consumer gets the advantage all the way around. But the one thing to be remembered, you know, you can't socialize on the internet the same way you can in a shopping center. You can't eat a hamburger on the internet. You can't get a haircut on the internet. And you certainly can't feel it. You know, there's something about going to a shopping center. And by the way, I'm talking to males out there. You're actually not our customer, so I hate to disappoint you. The females are our customer.
Thanks for that.
So you guys can sit in your underpants and shop on the thing. I'm worried more about whether they come to the shopping center than you.
No, but I think it's, well, maybe Soren could be the exception with his pink handkerchief.
Good. Doris, you had a question.
I have a question regarding the residential and student housing sector. We've been following up the Central European residential markets for probably the last 2 years, and I think one of the big obstacles is this is not a rental market, it's an owner-occupier market. Now, I would very much echo your comment, Xavier, about affordability, because I think that becomes more and more of an issue for young Poles, young Czechs. So I guess part of my question is what can be done to transform this into more of a rental market? Because for us as a long-term investor, we're not interested in just developing and selling it off after that. So we would rather like to stay invested for a longer period, in particular if you enter the market early, because that makes it interesting. And the other bit is about the student housing. I don't really think that Central Europe makes enough as a USP of the point that they can offer good universities at a relatively cheap pricing compared to, say, the London, the Paris, and what have you of this world. And this is probably something that we as a real estate community should work on jointly as well, because I do think that that is, again, a very interesting niche sector.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully heard the second question, but I think it was on affordability of education and how that links into the residential market.
Yeah, and it was also about Central Europe not making enough of that as a position, that you can offer affordable education product also for other regions, so not just Central Europe.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think the two, in terms of the affordability angle on both student housing and normal residential, I think that the two have, for the moment, from my perspective, I may be wrong, but from my perspective, they are quite similar in to the extent that as the market develops, like an institutional rental market, be it for students or for let's say, normal citizens, the first part of the cake is safely eaten up by those who have more than middle income families, basically, more than a middle income segment of the market. And that is often where guys, developers, investors focus on in the beginning, because it's a relatively easy and safe market. And this is idea of Ricardo. You go there where it is the easiest. And the easiest often is still in this market, as it is not mature and maturing, is in that part of the market. So the affordability issue may be here latent as well, but it's much more pregnant in Paris and in London than it is here, at least from my perspective. So I think it will take, although the question of affordability is very pregnant, I think it will take some time before the market institutionalizes downwards to kind of get scale and go and answer the real interesting fundamental question of course, volume, bringing volume into the market, which is at a lower price point, obviously. No? But from my perspective, that will take some time. And in terms of marketing the quality of education, I mean, if you look at the rankings of universities globally, there are about 3 really important rankings in the world, and all of them are a bit biased, arguably towards Anglo-Saxon universities. But let's take them as the best that we currently have. I think that the first Central and Eastern European university would on average be about 120 position on those global rankings. So the ranking of those universities, even we have some very old universities, is not that high. And that is, in terms of the branding, is kind of a handicap which we would need to understand whether that's really driven by the quality of education or whether it's driven because, you know, the criteria are defined in such a way that universities don't understand them, and you take in a good consultant and suddenly you move up 50 places in your rating. You know, that's what often happens as well, of course. So, I mean, there is a difficulty there. The other structural difficulty is the number of curricula that are offered in the English language. Because that, you know, the English have had this huge advantage that London has benefited most of, and then Edinburgh as well. It's the language. You know, people from India, from China, everyone, you know, knows English, so you go there. The French have it also, but a bit less. The Germans have it also, but a bit less. The Poles or the Czech have it even less. No? So, you know, you really need to develop this curricula, and I don't think that the universities are currently engaged in that section. But on the whole, of course, student housing already now is a very interesting investment, and of course, before it becomes mainstream, probably at a relatively higher price point and quality point.
Great. We're almost out of time. In fact, we are out of time. But you said you needed 2 seconds, so I'm going to count.
Well, so for student housing, the driver of student housing, in our view, is all about student mobility, and you're not going to get the rich international students coming into Central and Eastern Europe who are targeting largely UK universities. But you've seen it happen in Germany over the last decade. It's happening in Poland now, which is students going to university farther away because the universities are competing amongst themselves to be better, have specializations and, you know, towers of excellence in certain things. And students are traveling. They're no longer going to university in their hometown. They're going further away. And that's been the big driver of demand and where we've seen student housing markets take off. For the price point, it's just a matter of knowing your customer and building the right kind of product. So you don't build in Poland a super high amenity, studio-only, luxurious kind of product like you would have targeted to Chinese and Russian students in central London.
Good. Thanks very much for your contributions. I sadly didn't get the chance to ask you what your deal of the decade is, but I'll have to ask you later on. For now, thank you for your contributions, and thanks very much for yours in the panel. Thank you.